Story 1. My father used to take me to parties when I was around 7 years old. They always had a section of the house set aside for the kids, complete with game consoles, snacks, and movies. It was oddly wholesome, albeit wildly inappropriate, as someone would come to check on us every 20 to 30 minutes, asking, "Hey, are you all doing all right? Do you need any more snacks? More juice?" We felt like royalty. Story 2. They drank every night until they went to bed. They never drank until the day was done, so in their minds, they weren't alcoholics. However, they went through a giant bottle of Krubari Brothers wine every single night, except on special occasions when they would have whiskey or bourbon instead. When they had the bourbon out, I stayed away from home. They were in their mid-60s before they recognized they had a drinking problem. To their credit, they did stop drinking and remained sober for the rest of their lives. I wish they had started doing that when I was 12. Story 3. My parents were hoarders, and I realized later that the piles of junk in our home were definitely not normal. Story 4. My dad used to blame me, a child, for major life decisions. Our country was at war and my mom wanted to leave. He asked me about it once and I told him we should go to America because in the cartoons everyone has a butler. Coming to America became my fault. He went back for a while because he felt like a nobody here and had many unbelievable opportunities presented to him. According to him, he saw me in a dream and decided to come back. His missing out on a huge opportunity became my fault. They were looking to buy a house on the other side of the city. It was a pivotal time in my life, having just started high school. We relocated from friends and family, but I was supposed to commute over 2 hours in one direction because it was a magnet school. 13-year-old me liked the pool, so moving there became my fault. This pattern continued. He still does this, he just used to do it as well. Story 5. They yelled at each other daily. There is no way to undo the years I witnessed this fighting. It was essentially psychological abuse. Story 6. My biological father took me, at the age of 4, and my brother behind the barn to watch my mother with a gun to her head while she contemplated suicide. Fortunately, she did not go through with it and is still alive today. I haven't seen my biological father in over 30 years. I was molested by a family member, and my mother made me tell my biological father by myself, at the age of 4. When I informed him that his nephew had touched me inappropriately, he responded with, "What do you want me to do about it?" The nephew was still allowed to spend the night at our house. Story 7. I will list things that would drive my mother into a crying hysterical rage. Using too many dishes to make dinner, having bangs, boys with long hair, wearing a t-shirt and jeans to a football or baseball game we had to dress up, my dog barking, making mashed potatoes from scratch, going to the comic book store, going to the arcade, going to the library, going anywhere, a stranger asking for money, the house being too hot, the house being too cold, and being convinced the house was on fire despite no smell, no smoke, and no fire. Story 8. Every time we went to Outback Steakhouse or Texas Roadhouse, my mom would take the steak knives from our table before we left. At one point, we probably had around 30 steak knives in our drawer. Story 9. They are members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. In the early 2000s, many believed it was a sin to consume any caffeine. My mother discovered an empty bottle of Dr. Pepper in our basement, and I was treated as if she had found cocaine. Today, they consume a lot of caffeinated soda. Story 10. They allowed me to go places with my much older teenage siblings. I remember riding in the bed of a truck while they threw glass bottles at road signs around 1978 to 1979. This was in the countryside, where there wasn't much to do. I also remember one of their friends, Hank. He was an older guy, probably in his 20s, and he had a house and a truck. There were tie-dye tapestries and cool psychedelic posters, and when you turned on the black light, the colors glowed. I was enchanted. I don't remember anyone using marijuana, but looking back, it seems like that would fit with the psychedelic posters and tapestries. I'm pretty sure the glass bottles thrown from the truck were beer bottles. Those were good times. Story 11. My younger sister and I were raised by our mother, while knowing that we had 2 older half-siblings with whom she never really interacted. They lived with their father in another state, and eventually, through family gossip, I figured out that when she and their father split, she just couldn't handle them and handed them over to him permanently. It wasn't until I was 30 that I realized As a child, I thought my older siblings must have been terrible for my mother to not want them around. I felt I should be as agreeable, perfect, and helpful to her as possible so she'd want to keep me and my sister. It deeply affected me when she actually threatened to send me off to live with my father, hours away, as a teenager because my room was messy. Like, what the heck? Story 12. My mom went to Alcoholics Anonymous meetings just to pick up guys and get sympathy. She thrives on getting sympathy from everyone she meets and forced me to go to Al-Anon meetings. She was not, and still isn't, an alcoholic, nor were any of my grandparents, but used them as her excuse to attend those meetings. After a few months, I was pulled aside by the Al-Anon meeting leader, who was concerned that I never shared any stories. I didn't share anything because I had nothing to share. When he asked why I was there, I told him I had no clue why we were going to these meetings. I ended up getting her kicked out of Alcoholics Anonymous, which I didn't think was possible, and of course I never had to go to those Al-Anon meetings ever again. The sad part is she did end up picking up a guy who relapsed while they were dating and was a total jerk. She dumped him after a few months. Story 13. She took me on outings with the married man she was involved with. The worst moment was when we were all invited to his house for dinner. I was sitting there with his wife and kids, expected to comment on how good the chicken was. His son showed me his new bike, the exact same one I had received for my birthday from his dad. Story 14. My dad pushed us relentlessly, using dreams of success to manipulate us into working non-stop. He made us believe that our worth was only tied to doing what he said, ignoring our feelings and well-being. Looking back, it was less about ambition and more about control. Story 15. My dad would smoke marijuana in the car with my sister and me in the back seat, racing down the highway. We were about 4 and 6 years old. Dad would invite his marijuana dealer to Thanksgiving. For several years, it was a man who had been convicted of murder but had served his time. For several years, our after-school babysitter was a woman with Down syndrome. Her parents lived next door. But still, I don't remember her ever saying anything except, "I don't know." Dad would take us to concerts and spend the whole time under the influence of hallucinogens. My sister and I became very good at a young age at going from the field of a stadium up into the bleachers, finding the bathroom, and making it back to our dad, while he was so high that he barely knew we were there. When the man across the street used to sit in his yard with his shorts hanging down where every kid on the cul-de-sac could see, my mom just shrugged it off. There was a lot more. It was the 1980s. It was a strange time. Story 16. When I was a child, my mother took my brother aside for a conversation. He refused to tell me what it was about. The next day, my mother had a similar conversation with me. 2 weeks later, we both finally shared what our mother had said during those conversations, and she had told us both the same thing. That the other child was her favorite, and if we wanted her to keep loving us, we needed to improve our behavior. We were both very young at the time. My mother explained that she thought instilling a sense of sibling rivalry in us would make us less spoiled and entitled. Regarding the edit, I believe I found the similar post that people are discussing, but it actually represents the opposite of what I am describing. My mother told us each that we were the favorite, but she also said that the other one was the favorite. Story 17. My parents told each of my siblings and me individually that we were their favorite and that we shouldn't tell the others, as they might get jealous. Story 18. I was an A-B student involved in after-school clubs, but also had undiagnosed attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. As a result, we often got into arguments. My parents removed my bedroom door for more than half of my high school years because I talked back, and sent me to the family farm in another state each summer to work and get straightened out by my grandparents, aunts, and uncles so they wouldn't have to be around me. They put me on a Greyhound bus by myself at 13 to get me there. They wouldn't even drive or fly me. The joke was on them at least. I got to spend my summer riding horses, gathering choke cherries, tending a garden, and enjoying wonderful times with family who truly understood me. Story 19. When I was 6, my sister was 5, and our brother was a baby. My sister got a splinter in her toe while we were at her house. My mom looked at it, tried to get it out, but couldn't because my sister was kicking and screaming. She declared it would come out on its own and put a bandage on it. A few days later, my sister asked for my help to look at it. I remember cornering her in the bathroom while she screamed, kicked, and tried to bite us because it hurt so much. She was barely even walking. My mom became exasperated and clearly decided it was too much trouble, so she did nothing. During that time, her addiction was severe. She often slept for 18 to 20 hours after a binge. The incident with my sister happened towards the end of one of those binges. My mom laid down for a long sleep later that night, and we knew not to disturb her or her boyfriend while they were asleep. The next morning, when I woke up and saw my sister was gray, barely speaking, and refusing to leave the bed, I knew better than to wake our mom. I fed the baby and myself and then crawled into bed to feed my sister. She wouldn't even open her eyes or her mouth. I sensed something was wrong but didn't know what it was. I thought maybe she just needed to sleep longer. A couple of hours later, my sister still hadn't gotten out of bed, and my mom was still sleeping. I sneaked into her bedroom to take her phone and called my grandmother to tell her what was happening. She contacted my other grandmother and came over as fast as she could. When she arrived, she said we'd wait for my other grandmother to take the baby until she saw my sister. She ensured the baby was safe in the crib and told me grandmother was on her way to pick up the baby. We needed to go immediately. We went to the hospital where the doctors had to ask me what happened because my grandmother didn't know, and my mom wouldn't wake up. I told the doctor as much as I could, and he lifted my sister's pajama pants to get a better look. I remember seeing little red lines snaking up her foot and leg, and the doctor went pale and said, "This little girl needs surgery right now." My sister had developed cellulitis from the splinter, and a good portion of her toe had to be amputated. I remember the doctor telling me that I saved her life, but I didn't understand what that meant. My grandmother couldn't reach my dad because he was working, and she didn't know my sister was allergic to penicillin. This meant my sister had to stay in the hospital even longer to be treated for the allergic reaction. I remember pushing her around in a wheelchair to the game room in the pediatric ward so we could play a video game together. Now in our 30s, my sister has 2 kids, one of whom is a little girl about to turn 5 next month, looking just like my sister did at that age. Sometimes, I look at her and feel immense anger that my mom looked at a little girl like that, clearly sick and in pain, and decided it was too much of an inconvenience to do anything, almost to the point that my sister could have died. Then I hugged my niece extra tight. My mom claims to this day that she did nothing wrong, insisting that my memory is distorted and that my sister got the splinter and became sick overnight. Story 20. Every word from my mom felt like yelling. She also used to hit me. Once, she let her boyfriend beat me while she stood in the doorway, crying but never confronting him. When I said I would tell a teacher, they threatened to pull me from school and homeschool me. Story 21. My mom would leave me at random strangers' houses while she went out with her boyfriend to get high. I must have been around 7 or 8 years old. I never questioned it when I was little, but I remember being in one house when a guy pulled out a large gun from a dresser drawer. All of this happened while I was playing the Nintendo Entertainment System Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2 game with some other kids in that house. Story 22. My mother set me on a strict eating schedule that was carefully planned, so that I couldn't eat anything all day until dinner at around 6. Whenever she cooked, she would intentionally make food that I didn't like, was too spicy, or for whatever reason, force me to eat it or nothing at all. This persisted for over a year, 5 days a week, because she wouldn't do it around my dad but was homeschooling me, meaning locking me in my room with schoolwork until 3 and spending all her time favoring my older brother. She would constantly make comments about my appearance and weight, which she still does to this day. There were a few times when she and my brother ate my whole portion of food, so I wouldn't have gotten anything if my dad hadn't given me some of his and made more for himself. Needless to say, I have a very unhealthy relationship with food and with my mother. Additionally, she told me when I was about 5 that if I had scars, I wouldn't be pretty and no one would love me. She implied I have some kind of inappropriate relationship with my dad because I prefer him, as he is not abusive. Instead of addressing the situation, she took pictures of me naked the morning after my brother was sexually abusing me when I was about 6. I'm sure there's more I could mention, but honestly, I don't want to think about it anymore. Story 23. Bedroom and bathroom doors are never to be closed. Some of the reasons include the need for emergency access and the prevention of mold in the bathroom. Story 24. My dad had an accident, lost his job, was diagnosed with cancer, and died all within 3 years. There was not one family discussion about anything with my sister or me. He was not mentioned by anyone after his death. Story 25. Use the white pages to find random Korean individuals in any city they were visiting to cold call and ask where to buy Korean food. Story 26. My stepmom wanted me to start drinking tea for some reason I couldn't understand. I simply didn't like it. One time we were at a cafe and I asked for water. When the waiter arrived, he brought tea for all of us. She then told me they didn't have water, even though a cup of water with a tea bag beside it was right in front of me. My father just sat there quietly, allowing her to manipulate the situation. Story 27. He looked at me gasping for air from anaphylaxis at age 18 and told me I could drive myself to urgent care the next day before leaving me with my grandmother, for whom I was the caretaker. He has since tried to convince anyone he can that I am not allergic to antibiotics, despite my husband having had to take me to the emergency room for anaphylaxis, with the doctor diagnosing me after I took antibiotics. Story 28. Mom drank herself into a stupor and ended up half-conscious on the floor on many occasions. She also kicked me out of the house whenever we argued. There was physical punishment if I did not find a job during summer break. My mom was the very definition of unhinged. Story 29. I was told that God was testing me through the immense bullying I experienced at school, and if I continued to turn the other cheek, I would be rewarded in heaven. Story 30. Enmeshed family. I was essentially the second husband and dad. I listened to my mom and dad discuss their marriage with me. They were young parents who didn't really know any better. They have since apologized. Story 31. My mother was an addictions counselor. I was 16 when I realized she was having inappropriate relationships with her clients, likely well before she and my father split. She often brought them home to stay for a while or because they had not been admitted into a halfway house. My brother and I caught her kissing them multiple times, but she would claim they were just hugging and that we were imagining things. She would also buy them alcohol and drugs. It took me until I was 25 to realize just how troubled she is. That's just the tip of the iceberg. Story 32. My dad used to count how much toilet paper I would use and would get angry if my showers lasted longer than 5 minutes or occurred more than 3 times a week. Story 33. They regularly got into fights about winning the lottery. When it would get particularly high, one would say to the other, "What would you do with the money?" Always, one would ask the other this question, and who started it by asking the question always changed. The person asked would answer. The asker would disagree, and then round one would start. It was identical every time. 1. What would you do if we won? 2. I'd buy a horse farm in Florida and spend my winters there. 1. Like hell. I'd still be following those horses around if we won. I'd be going golfing in South Carolina. 2. So you'd leave me alone to tend to the horses? 1. They aren't my horses. I am not spending my lottery money on horses. 2. I'm not spending my lottery money on golf. And then the yelling would start. They'd fight about how stupid the other would be to spend lottery money on X because spending it on Y was smarter. They'd yell until both of their feelings would be hurt. Then they'd be cold to each other for the next few days. When they didn't win the lottery that week, they'd start talking again. I was definitely in my late 20s when I realized how messed up it was. I was visiting and this argument started. I ended up yelling, "For the love of God, if you win the lottery, you are getting divorced. That is all that is guaranteed to happen." Story 34. My biological father used to cheat frequently. My mother would take my brother and me in the car and wait outside the house of whichever girlfriend he was seeing until he came out. Then she would quickly leave. I suppose she wanted him to know that she was aware. As a child, I just knew it was time to play with my Game Boy in the back seat of the car. Story 35. Starting when I was 14, my single mother would give me $40 and tell me she was going to Mexico or Napa for a week. This money was for me and my 11-year-old brother while she was gone. I was always glad to see her go, as she came back in a much better mood. She would drop my brother off at the marina when he was 5 and tell him to find a sailboat to crew on in the Pacific Ocean. As an adult, I asked her how she rationalized this behavior, and she told me we would either live or die. I normalized this as her response to living through the war. My brother and I both became very attentive parents. My brother became an outstanding sailor. He has never mentioned any unusual boating incidents, but being dropped off at the dock has profoundly impacted his parenting. He brings it up when we revisit our parents' parenting horror stories, and there are quite a few. Story 36. I was caught with a boy when I was 16, just making out like teenagers do. I was sent to live with my grandma in a different state for the summer, and then I was grounded for 3 months upon my return. My mom took me to the doctor to get a pap smear done for the first time, and I didn't know that was what was happening. I cried the entire time while my mom stayed in the room. That was pretty traumatic for just making out with a boy. Story 37. So my mom had this thing called Shut Up spray. It was a breath spray that she got from the dollar store. It smelled good and tasted good, so my brother and I obviously wanted it all the time. We could only use it in the car on the way to school or wherever. One day, she accidentally sprayed too much in my mouth, and I was quiet completely, which was impressive because I was such a chatterbox growing up. It didn't hurt. It was just super intense and felt uncomfortable to talk. So I kept quiet and waited for the super minty flavor to pass. My mom thought this was funny. My brother and I would ask for the shut up spray verbatim, but she would also give it to us if she had a headache or wanted to see if it would still work. I still get a chuckle out of that. Everyone always looks at me funny when I tell it, though. Another time, we had a rule that the front seat couldn't hit the back seat and vice versa when playing slug bug. My mom almost crashed the car one time because she turned around to punch us. I had a Volkswagen Beetle for my first car, and we had to put a rule in place where my car was exempt because we would pass by a window and punch the nearest person on the hour. Story 38. I remember one time I woke up, went to the bathroom, and noticed the toilet had waste smeared all over it. So I asked my mother what was going on. She dodged the question and asked me to drive her to the supermarket, completely unfazed by the situation and ignoring what I said altogether. And no, she wasn't going to the store to buy cleaners. Story 39. Beat me, made me think it happened to everybody. Told me they didn't know better. I feel messed up for life. Story 40. My mom was quite obsessed with not allowing my brother and me to have sugar or anything she deemed processed or unhealthy. The wildest thing was that this obsession did not stop at birthdays. She molded a big block of mashed dates into a cake shape, covered it with plastic wrap, decorated the wrap with real frosting to make it look nice and normal for pictures, and then peeled the frosting off after the photos without letting us even have a lick of it. She also filled a birthday piñata with carrot sticks, celery sticks, honey candies, and healthy fruit rolls. All the kids invited were confused and disappointed. We used strands from spaghetti squash to make spaghetti instead of using actual noodles. She repeatedly made meals that tasted awful but didn't care that we hated them because it was good for you. And that's all that mattered, not the taste. I remember my brother and I sneaking into the pantry to eat spoonfuls of straight brown sugar just to have something sugary once in a while. We had to take only a little so she wouldn't notice. I often got grounded for being caught sneaking to the local grocery store to buy snacks with my own allowance. Every year of my life, I was considered failure to thrive by doctors. I struggle to maintain weight now and don't have a very healthy relationship with food. I have to remind myself to eat because it's easy to forget when it feels like a chore. Story 41. Made me watch the movie Mommy Dearest so I would know other kids had it worse, so she couldn't be that abusive by comparison. She later tried to pull the same thing with food, like Joan Crawford, but didn't see the irony. Story 42. Oh boy, where do I begin? During dinner one evening, my family got into an argument and my dad threatened to throw his knife at me. I dared him to throw it, not thinking he would, and to my surprise, he chucked a knife at my chest. Being in the car when my parents were fighting was frightening. My dad would swerve the car, speed, and drive recklessly. My mom confided in me things I should not have heard as a kid. Information about my dad, financial issues, her life. I just wanted a regular mom. I couldn't complain or be sad about anything because it always turned into my mom's time to shine and take over the conversation. I later learned this was abuse and involved enmeshed relationships. Story 43. My mom would smoke in the car with the windows up for most of my childhood. Looking back now, I can only imagine how horrific I smelled when I arrived at school, a friend's house, or wherever we were going. I learned in school how harmful secondhand smoke was, and I would beg her to stop. She never stopped. Story 44. When my sister and I were children, about 8 or 9 years old, we both got head lice. Our mother decided to pour gasoline on my sister's head to eliminate them. My sister cried so much that our mother gave me regular lice shampoo. At the time, I felt lucky. Reflecting on it, that was a pretty terrible thing to do. Story 45. My mom took a condom I had kept in my backpack when I was in high school. We girls had a sexual education class that taught us to always be prepared because boys often wouldn't be. Even if we weren't sexually active, it was better to be safe than sorry if that were to change unexpectedly. My mom's excuse for searching through my bag was that she heard a beeping sound and wanted to turn off whatever it was. There was nothing. The pocket where that single condom was kept was not one you would just dig into randomly. She was definitely snooping. Then she had the audacity not to believe me when I explained the class and the instruction to have one on hand. I wasn't sexually active at the time and didn't even date anyone. She told me I wasn't getting it back because I wasn't going to be having sex. I sat there thinking this was the dumbest action any adult could take, removing the only protection from your teenager who may or may not be having sex. What could go wrong there? Instead of having a real conversation about sex and safety, it was just a dismissive, nope, you won't be doing it. That attitude certainly didn't stop me when I finally did. Story 46. My mom would punish me for the smallest mistakes or because she was angry and needed someone to take it out on. Sometimes she would make a weak excuse for why I needed to be punished. Story 47. I have shared this story before, but my parents once made me sit at the table for 36 hours because I refused to eat liver and onions. They watched me in shifts as if I were a prisoner of war. That was the first time I outmatched my parents' will, and my mother truly disliked it. However, I never had to clean my plate again. Story 48. Going places that involved gambling was always done in a particular way. We would go to a sandwich shop that featured a lottery, and my memories mainly consist of getting my favorite sandwich and playing arcade games. We also visited a smoke shop that had convenience store items, where I would get candy and browse the magic shop next door while my dad socialized with the adults, which meant he was playing the lottery. As a child, I never felt like I was being dragged into a gambling situation. I thought I was simply enjoying a fun outing filled with exciting activities. However, there was always gambling happening alongside those experiences. I didn't fully realize this until I became an adult and was recounting a story. I mentioned visiting the magic shop while my dad played the lottery, and the person I was talking to said, "Oh, he liked to play the numbers, did he?" I responded, "Oh no, well yeah, not like that." "Oh yeah." That's when I realized this person was quite knowledgeable about the lottery. Story 49. My family remains friends with all the exes, and I mean all of them. For instance, my uncle cheated on his wife, and she moved in with my grandparents during the divorce. Imagine that. Cheating and your family takes in your wife to help her through the divorce? They supported her by looking after the kids so she could work and buy a new house afterward. This was totally normal for me growing up, and she attended our family celebrations more than he did. Then my mother had a relationship with the husband of her friend, the wife my uncle cheated on. When they broke up, 2 of my mother's friends began dating him. He moved into the house next to my mother, and there were no issues. It was completely normal for us to have my aunt's ex-husband over for lunch, even though they divorced 25 years ago. Even our friends' ex-partners were always around. My parents separated, but my father was friends with almost all of my mother's ex-boyfriends, except for 2. He still keeps in touch with many of them today. My father's friend Tony often worked in my father's garden with him. The thought of jealousy or ownership never crossed our minds. I recall my grandmother being in the hospital, and all her children, grandchildren, current partners, ex-partners, their families, neighbors, and friends showed up. The hospital was packed. The hallway and waiting room were full. I never understood that jealousy was even a thing. You break up, but you don't disappear. Story 50. My dad locked me in the bathroom when I cried until I was old enough to figure out how to get out. Story 51. My mom sent me back to school 3 days after my dad passed away from cancer. She never took me to a therapist. I was a sophomore in high school. Story 52. Leave me home alone with my 3 younger brothers, with no way to contact anyone and no food prepared. Felt normal at the time. Story 53. We had a split-level house with a staircase that went from the lower floor to the kitchen and a longer staircase that went from the kitchen to the upstairs. My mom would make me run up and down the 2 flights of stairs, which she called up and downs. Going all the way up to the upstairs and all the way down one time was 1 up and down. She would make me do as many as 100 up and downs or more at a time, standing in the kitchen where the 2 staircases met in the middle, ready to hit me with a wooden spoon that she had written "Mommy's Little Helper" on with a permanent marker. I would try so hard to run fast enough to avoid getting hit, but she was always faster. She made me do this for things like not cleaning the bathroom well enough or not emptying the dishwasher quickly enough. Story 54. My dad was an alcoholic. He would drink a gallon of vodka during our weekends with him, and the kitchen was littered with empty bottles. He was an angry and depressed drunk. I remember one night vividly. We were at his friend's place, and his friend had a daughter around my sister's and my age. We could not have been more than 10 at that time. We were playing when my dad called us in. He and his friend were lying on the bed, and my dad began ranting about wanting to die, saying his life was nothing without our mom and that the divorce was unfair. He asked why we did not love him, among other things. Then he noticed a sword hanging on the wall, took it down, handed it to me and said, "Just kill me now. Just stab me here, under my ribs and into my heart." I was in shock, and my sister started crying behind me while I was frozen. He guided the sword and said, "Do it. Just do it. Just kill me. Kill me. Just stab me here and kill me." Then his friend quickly sobered up, stepped in, took the sword from me, and sent us to his daughter's room for the night. This was a typical night for us when we were at our dad's for the weekend. Story 55. My mother forced me to undergo plastic surgery against my will when I was a teenager. I woke up on the operating table screaming about my lack of consent, so she rescheduled the procedure and made them give me a stronger sedative. Then she had them perform the surgery again before the swelling had gone down and against the surgeon's advice, as we did not know what my nose would look like. This was back when plastic surgery was relatively new for consumers, and doctors were not required to report such cases. As an adult, I have written to the surgeon asking why he would do this, but he never responded. Story 56. In the 70s, my mother's car had a buzzer in the dashboard when the seat belts were unfastened. She just clicked them together and tucked them into the seat cushions rather than buckling us up. I didn't wear a seatbelt until I was in my teens. Story 57. I got my brother diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder and medicated. I researched it and realized I probably had it worse than my brother, yet I never got diagnosed. My grades were apparently good enough. Content warning: animal abuse. My dad once neutered a cat we owned with an X-Acto knife and used a piece of chimney pipe to prevent it from scratching him. Story 58. Looking back, I realized my parents used to leave me alone for short errands without a second thought. The windows were cracked, of course, but that was just normal in the 90s. Now, as an adult, I can't believe how risky that was. Story 59. Kneeling on a broom or sitting in a dark room all day as punishment, or having water sprayed in my face to wake me up in the morning, were among other things I experienced. I didn't realize it was wrong until I mentioned it to others, and they looked horrified. Story 60. As others have mentioned, yelling affects me negatively. Once, my parents were arguing, and I was listening from around a corner or through a door. My mother grabbed me and brought me into the middle of their conversation, continuing the fight. While raising our son, my wife was the one who yelled, not judging her. I couldn't bring myself to do it. I would express my displeasure through silence. I still struggle with decorating a Christmas tree. It always turned into a nightmare when I was young because I couldn't spread the tinsel around correctly. Now I am 62 years old. Story 61. This is a list of a few incidents I can remember, but there are many more that I do not recall. My mother is functioning normally now, but she has mental health issues and went through menopause abruptly due to cancer when I was in elementary school. She had experienced a sudden onset of mental illness between the time my older brother was born and when she became pregnant with me. Additionally, she suffered several childhood traumas. This is not me excusing what I'm about to share, but I want to explain why it happened and why it seems nonsensical. I often wished she would just hit me so that maybe my father would leave and I could explain what was happening, as her behavior was difficult to understand. Elementary school age asterisk. My mother told me that Muslims were going to take over the country, and because I was pretty, they would turn me into a sex slave, suggesting they could not marry a Christian girl. She threatened that if I became pregnant as a teenager, she would wait until I gave birth and then kill me so my father could raise the baby while she was in jail. She warned that if I ever came home with a girlfriend, she would kill us both. After a news story about an autistic child who suspiciously drowned in a wheelchair, she said she understood why parents might murder their autistic children. A teacher had suggested I be tested for autism, but I was never evaluated. She promised to buy me a shirt she had seen that reminded her of me. However, when I kept asking about it, she told me to stop inquiring or she would not buy it. I stopped asking and she never purchased the shirt. I was not with her when she saw it, so I do not understand why she mentioned it if she did not intend to buy it. She told me my food was on the table on Christmas. I was a picky eater, so my food was different from everyone else's. Since my potatoes were already buttered, I assumed I was supposed to eat it. She later yelled at me for ruining Christmas dinner, and since this was a rare incident my father witnessed, he reprimanded her. She complimented my blue eyes and blonde hair but then spitefully said, "Hitler would have loved you." Middle school asterisk. She accused me of shaving my legs at my grandfather's funeral in front of my father's family, who were grieving their loss. She accused me of lactating and being pregnant because I had a stain on my shirt, even though I was only 11 and had started menstruating the previous year. High school asterisk. She yelled at me through a bathroom door while I was crying after she had scolded me for missing school due to a stomach bug. She had allowed me to stay home. I have always preferred to hide when crying due to other things she had done in my childhood, making this particularly difficult for me. She asked a friend if I was a lesbian while handing her money. She became upset because I wanted to stay out a little later to see a movie with friends, even though I was already 18 and my brother had been allowed to stay out late before he turned 18. She got angry at me for not returning home promptly from prom, even though I was not the one driving and was already 18. Story 62. My mother insisted my father wasn't an alcoholic, saying, "He's just a heavy drinker. This is a man who started his day with whiskey in his coffee." He would then visit various friends at several taverns, making sure to have a six-pack of beer in a cooler while driving. Once home, he had a second beer fridge in the kitchen with a keg installed and tapped for easy serving. Story 63. Sending me to the liquor store to get alcohol. I was 8. He taught me how to drive a manual transmission one summer so I could transport materials and a couple of workers back and forth while adding 2 rooms to the house. I was 9. The drive was just a few blocks away, but he didn't want to be bothered, and none of the workers knew how to drive manual. He owned a grocery store and gave me free rein to eat whatever I wanted whenever I wanted. He never told me no. I was 6, and my diet consisted of soft drinks, potato chips, and pastries. I'm surprised I didn't develop diabetes. He opened a bar that was open from 5 to 11 every day. He didn't want to pay a bartender because the bar wasn't very popular and sales were slow. Guess who had to be the bartender at 15? Yes, I got home from school around 2:30 to 3, and I just had time to eat, do my homework, and then head straight to the bar. I did it until I turned 18 and moved out. I didn't get paid for any of it, but I didn't expect to. You are supposed to always help family. Story 64. My mom took me on girls' trips when I was 9 to 11 to interesting places. She would always meet a friend on these trips and spend a lot of time with them. I didn't realize until I was an adult that my mom was making these trips to meet men from online chat rooms, alone in hotel rooms in big cities with her child. Once she and her friend were intimate on the bed next to me. I wasn't allowed to tell my siblings or dad about these trips or her new friends. Story 65. When we were out in public, My mom used to whisper that people were looking at me and saying unkind things about me. Story 66. Would forget to pick me up at the babysitter's on Friday, and since it was before cell phone days, they were simply unreachable. She would basically have to keep me until they showed up for entire weekends. Looking back, it seems amazing she never called Child Protective Services about this. Story 67. Drink and drive. They are from eastern Montana, where the towns are few and far between. When driving anywhere from 100 to 300 miles away, they would stop at every bar along the way for a few beers. We kids would stay in the car and they would bring us drinks and snacks, or sometimes the bar would let us in to play shuffleboard and enjoy candy bars. Story 68. My dad once held me over the side of some railings on a second-story floor and started tossing me up and down in the air, literally letting go of me to catch me mid-air. I was around 4.5 years old, and it scared me, so I started to cry and begged him to stop. He asked, "Do you not trust me?" I told him that I did, but I was really scared of heights and he was scaring me. He only promised not to do it anymore when I reassured him repeatedly that I wasn't crying because I didn't trust him. I think my father did it because he was inspired by Michael Jackson's bizarre stunt, where he dangled his baby, named Blanket, over a balcony in front of a group of media reporters. It caused a lot of controversy at the time and added to his wacko jacko image. Most people accused him of child endangerment, but many fans tried to rationalize his behavior. However, I don't think Michael Jackson was ever able to coherently explain why he did what he did. My father wasn't a big Michael Jackson fan, but I heard from my mother that when he became aware of the incident, he was very interested in it and rationalized Michael Jackson's actions as a trust exercise with his child. My late father's mental health was generally a lot better at the time. My parents were beginning to go through divorce proceedings and had already decided which of us would go to which parent. My brother staying with my mother and I staying with my father. I generally had a very good relationship with my dad, and he was a model parent in every other respect aside from this bizarre incident, so I was shocked by it happening as much as by him personally doing such a thing to me. In summary, my dad once held me over a ledge and started tossing me up and down as a trust exercise. If he had lost his grip at any point, I could have ended up injured or worse. Story 69. I gathered all the young cousins for weekend sleepovers. While we played, the adults shared some cannabis together. Story 70. My mom would go to the bar down the road from our apartment when she was in between marriages. I was 5 to 7 years old. She would even tell me she was leaving and wrote the phone number down for me to call her if I needed to. Story 71. My dad struggled with addiction. He would take my belongings and trade them for drugs. Most of the stories I share about my childhood usually end with me thinking, "Oh wait, that isn't as funny as I remember." Story 72. My mother's verbal manipulation often involved making comparisons. When my mother and I argued, she would say, "I never talked to my mother the way you are now." This was meant to guilt me into behaving. She used this line on me so often that I eventually snapped and responded, "Your mother also kicked you out of the house at 16, and you keep a distant relationship with her." She was very stunned that I went there. It wasn't kind, but the truth is I was able to fire back because I had learned it from her. I believe she realized what she had passed on, and we have had a better relationship since then. However, we also live states apart. I want to note that my grandmother has spent time repairing the relationship with my mother. Story 73. We were always poor growing up, especially after my parents divorced, but my mom had an entire room full of clothes and shoes. She turned a spare bedroom into her closet. I never thought much of it when I was younger, but as an adult, I realized her spending habits could have been used on us children a little more. Story 74. When I was 8 and my sister was 4, my mom worked in a factory where she had to be at work for 6 a.m., essentially leaving around 5 a.m. She would wake me up before she left so that I was awake and ready to get my baby sister up by 6:30 or 7 to get us both dressed, washed, and fed for school. Then, I would walk the 6 blocks uphill to school around 8:15. This was Ontario in the early 1990s, so it wasn't that bad. Another time when I was 6, we lived in Toronto, and I was walking home from school by myself. A taxi pulled up next to me, and the woman driver asked if I wanted a ride, to which I naively said yes. Fortunately, my mother was hiding in the back seat as part of a stranger danger test. I failed that test, but at least it was her and not someone else. But I'm fine. I don't know about being unhinged, but it is definitely not something I would do with my kids. Story 75. My father used to send my brother and me to the shop so he could mistreat his girlfriend. One time we returned and she had a black eye. Story 76. My mom was visiting her friend while my brother and I were with the friend's two children in the parents' bedroom. The boy was showing us his stepdad's shotgun, sitting it upright and facing the ceiling. We four children stood around it in a circle. The boy pulled the trigger and blew a hole through the ceiling the size of a baseball. I couldn't hear for 30 minutes. They checked on the people upstairs. Later, the mom asked me if her son fell when he fired it. I replied, yes, and she laughed. Story 77. Starting at 11, I was left home to babysit my 1-year-old sister and 6-year-old brother, while my parents went across the street to the bar in our small mountain town. My brother had anger issues and would get so mad that he would grab a kitchen knife and chase me while I held my little sister. My parents' room was the only one with a locking door, and I remember sitting on the edge of their bed, crying as I tried to call the bar, which I could see from the window, to get them to come help me. This happened more than once, and often they told me to handle it until they were ready to come home. I can relate to many of the stories shared here, including exposure to drugs, drinking and driving with us in the car, molestation, neglect, emotional abuse, and control over food, just to name a few. Yet my parents wondered why I cut them out of my life shortly after I had my own children. It's astonishing to me. I'm so glad I survived. Hugs to all my fellow survivors here. May you forever thrive despite your origins. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.